Welcome to the Catholic Intellectual Podcast with Stephen Doherty. And my guest today is Lizzy Polishan, and we're going to talk about poetry. Welcome, Lizzy.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So we've talked once before about poetry and how you see it, its usefulness in, say, the Catholic intellectual tradition. Could you just say something about art in general? How do you see this as impacting the Catholic intellectual tradition and the intellectual tradition in general? Sometimes, as you know, you were classically educated, the Greeks kind of looked down on the arts in some sense, that it wasn't, for them, the arts were not as lofty as philosophy or mathematics or things like that.
Yeah.
Do you think they gave it like a lower tier?
Uh-oh.
Don't you think so?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I think they did like the art, but yeah, I think it was maybe a lower tier compared to philosophy and math and stuff like that.
Yeah, but they...
Oh, for sure, yeah.
They certainly didn't think it was a pathway to real enlightenment in the same way that philosophy would be.
Right.
Right?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
So do you think it could be that kind of pathway?
Absolutely.
So I was thinking, various cultures I thought had various different paths in the arts. What I was thinking is, as indicated by the background of my iPad, where you have Michelangelo's statue, it seemed like in Italy, the artistic path to God was in art, in painting and in sculpture. I thought maybe in Russia and in many parts of Eastern Europe, it was more literature, that they saw literature as the path, and they really developed literature. So there was a lot of really deep theology brought out in various parts of literature. And it seemed like every culture had their own path, whether it was music. Like, say, for example, in Wales, the Welsh are big on hymn singing, right? Singing was singing music in general, but singing in particular was sort of their path to God, their artistic path to God. Right. And so what do you see as your path to God artistically?
Oh, well, I mean, I write poetry. I really like poetry, so I do think that that's definitely a path to God. I think that any art form that you are really into can be your pathway to God. I think you can connect to God, in any way. And I think, it's funny that you are talking about this. So I was just talking to my mom this morning, and she called me, and she said she heard a song on the radio, and it was actually Rihanna's new song. And she was like, I was crying. I was so moved by this song because it felt like the song, and I haven't heard the song yet, but she said it felt like the song came from a place outside of the world. Like, it came from, basically God. And my mom was like, this is the same way that I feel when I'm creating stuff. So my mom is also a painter and an artist, and she was like, it feels like that connection to something beyond, so. And I think that's coming through music, that's also coming through painting, but it's any connection that you feel to something beyond. And I think that, like, in writing poetry, sometimes you sit down at the computer or with your notebook or anything, and you're just listening, and the poem seems to come from a place beyond you. And I do think that would be, you could call it the voice of the universe or the voice of God or like whatever you believe in, but there's definitely times when I think art comes to you, and I think most artists would understand that from a place that is like beyond yourself, but then somehow you're writing it, and so you're connecting, and it's very, very spiritual thing, I think. And you could also, in reading other people's art and encountering other people's art, not just in creating it, I think you can have that same experience as well.
So in terms of Catholicism and Christianity, how would you, what do you think is different about when art is used to transmit this rather than, say, philosophy or things like this, right? When they bring it, if you were to try to be a priest in the first year they come in and they teach you philosophy, they generally don't teach you art, right?
Right.
So which do you do you think it's different having this having something transmitted with art than with, say, a more I don't want to say rigorous, but a stricter interpretation, like a philosophy or theology, something like this.
Like a more logical,
yeah,
or more grounded. Oh, that's really interesting. Well, obviously, so I like philosophy a lot too, and I think that it has benefits and stuff to being able to connect with God. But I also think that in art, you're getting something that you can't always get with philosophy, I think. So, particularly with analytic philosophy, it is so much about the logic. And when you're getting into art, there's breakdown of it. Like it doesn't just have to be bounded by the logic. And I would kind of argue that God is an artist, and I think that's not a crazy thing to argue. Like, he literally, that's the first like page of the Bible, is God coming down and making the world as this work of art with like all of these beautiful things, and like calling all of these beautiful things into being and incarnating things that weren't there before, and so I think in encountering art, you're encountering God in that way. In creating, you're mirroring or being, how God is, Catholic God, and just encountering incarnation in that way. I think you can sometimes get a richer, or deeper, or even like a more, sometimes like a more subconscious understanding. Like, it doesn't have to be everything that you're understanding. You're understanding that God is the logic, but then also the thing that came before logic, and all of these, like things that you can't just describe neatly. And I think that sometimes art does a really good job of getting at truths that you can't articulate clearly with just like a logical proof, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
No, I understand. I mean, even though my whole life is dedicated to logical proofs, that's what my profession is.
Right.
I think that art does a better job in evangelization than strict logical rigor does. I think if you want to convince somebody, not just that there is a God, but that it's the God of Catholicism, the God that we've described, the God in the Gospels, you can have long drawn out conversations, like showing them Aquinas is proof of the existence of God, or something like this, or Anselm's, or things like this. I think it rarely convinces people one way or the other. It can, right. And I think all it ever does is sort of make people more comfortable with their own beliefs.
Right.
Right. But in art, I think you actually, when people experience something transcendent in art, they actually feel God's presence much more.
Right.
So even if you walk into a church and it's a really beautiful church, you walk into something that's just spectacular, and you see the images, and that could really move you and make you feel God's presence, so that you understand something is there. Does it help you to say, you can't walk out of the church then and say, okay, here's why God exists, I'll give you an Aquinas-like proof.
Right.
But you're convinced in yourself of the truth of your faith, right?
Right, yeah.
So then when you hear like St. Anselm's proof, you think, yeah, well, I agree with that. Right? But I don't think that has the same power to evangelize as does, especially music, I would say. Music, art, things like this, poetry, literature. Right. So if you write a really tremendous novel, it could make people really feel like they want to be part of the faith. Right. They could feel that presence. Even a film, you could see a film, and it really, because it illuminates what God is in terms that you see every day. Right. It's because it uses the senses as in a phrase that you often like to quote, the smells and bells, right?
Forgot about that. Yeah.
Because you're interacting with the humans on a human level, right?
Yes.
Where most people don't spend their days, other than me, thinking about logical proofs of things all day long.
Right. Yes.
So I think it impacts. So I think that in terms of the work of the church, the work of evangelization, art, poetry, literature, everything, music, especially music, because it's so useful in liturgy, right? That it's absolutely vital,
right.
Which it always disturbed me, that part of the Protestant Reformation, those Protestants who wanted to like whitewash the churches and get rid of the music, get rid of the art, get rid of these kind of things is unnecessary, which of course I do not ascribe to that belief at all.
Right. No, I completely agree.
Because we are humans, and this is the way we interact. I mean, there's nothing wrong. So could you have a great mass without any art whatsoever? Sure. Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, but that depends what you mean by great.
Also. But then it's like, so why would you? Right.
Exactly.
Right. It's if you have this opportunity. So I mean, you could be in a war-torn place. I've seen, inspirational photos of this, where like soldiers in World War II just in a bombed-out place having mass on a rock. Where they know they might die tomorrow, and they're having mass. That's a beautiful mass, even though all of the artistic aspects, they're not singing, they're not painting. It's still very moving.
Right.
But if you know, if you're in a church to see the arts, hear the music. You know, if you're in a beautiful church where you hear the really spectacular music, that could be just awe-inspiring.
Right. Well, okay, and like talking about that type of mass, right? Like on a rock in a war torn. I mean, I think that there's something fundamentally emotional about that, and fundamentally, I think you would be experiencing a ton of emotions. Obviously,
Yeah.
At any time you're confronting like mortality,
Yeah.
I think that brings stuff out, and I think, but in that case, you wouldn't even need. I mean, the art would be almost like extraneous because
Yeah.
you are having this really powerful emotional experience. But then I think that art can unlock the emotional side of things in a way that like logic can't. So like when you're not, when you're just in your everyday life and nothing terrible is happening or anything, in order to encounter emotions, like the emotional side of God and connect with God at an emotional level, I think that art can probably do that better.
That's why I think liturgy should be beautiful, and I think you should use uh, beautiful language when you can in the liturgy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fan of simplifying the language in,
Yeah.
in liturgical settings. I think it should be poetic because that's what reaches. Someone who I admire just said he was talking about something, the use of archaic language in liturgy. Someone who's not a Catholic, and he was advocating in the sense that this is what connects you to the unmoving nature of Christianity. It's not just something we made up yesterday, right? When you use the more archaic, the more poetic, it ties you back through a long, long, long tradition.
Yeah.
Right.
Wait, that was something oh my God, we're like on the same page today. That was something I was thinking about in the car ride over. And I was thinking about it specifically in terms of poetry, but all art. And I was thinking about how, so I think I maybe said this last time, but Lee Young Lee, who's a poet that I really like, he said that every poem is a descendant of God. Did I tell you this? Mm-hmm. Oh, maybe I didn't say this. So he says every poem is a descendant of God. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think in addition to every poem being a descendant of God, it's also, created by a descendant of God, created by a person. But I was thinking about how, you can pick up, I could pick up a collection written by somebody who's alive right now, and I could follow them on Instagram and be like, hey, I love your collection. It's so beautiful. I'm really moved, all this stuff. But then I could also pick up a poem by, like, Shakespeare or Seamus Heaney or, like, Yeats or somebody from, like, that, or, like, Sappho or, like, Hildegard, that lady, like, from forever ago, and you're literally reaching through time and space and encountering these people who are not here anymore, but you're still able to have a relationship with them through this art that's left behind. And I mean, the art never, the art is never going to die. The art is going to be there forever.
Yeah. So it's like having a conversation with Shakespeare, right?
Yeah,
you get to read what he's thinking,
right.
or anyone else for that matter. I mean, sometimes when the language is really archaic, it's difficult, right? If you had to listen to Virgil speak in Latin, we might be.
Well, right.
It might be hard to really get the poetry if you're not fluent in that language.
Right.
But that's why I think it's important to sometimes you have to read it over and over. But with liturgical language, you're hearing it over and over.
Right.
So the more poetic, the more beautiful.
Right.
I think the more impact it has.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And the more sensory too, because I think your mind, is so powerful. And so if I start talking about oranges, like you can imagine, like your mind is automatically going to think of oranges, and you're going to have that sensory experience, even if it's not like on the table in front of you. But if I, start talking about a magical or a logical proof, I mean, maybe you would see it in your head, but like most people, I think probably wouldn't like even know how to encounter that. And so that's why I think like sensory language, like beautiful language and sensory language and all of that stuff can be so moving.
Yeah. And I don't mean to denounce the logical proof. It's very vital.
No, yeah.
But I think that there's two sides of the coin.
Right.
Right? We're not just computers. We're not machines.
Right.
We interact with the world, and so we should. If you're trying to convey a message, the message of Christianity, it's important to be able to do it on many different levels.
Yes.
Right? You don't know which level is going to hit somebody.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Maybe some people just need that logical proof, but I think that's a small percentage.
Right.
Maybe other people need an artistic approach. Maybe some people even need an emotional approach, right? That they think with their emotions rather than with strict logic, right? So that might not be good if you're a computer programmer, but if you're a human being, that's a good thing, right? And you want to reach them and the message of Christianity at their level, right? So tell us about the poet and the poem you have for us today.
Okay, so the poem and poet that I picked for today, so it's by Ilya Kaminsky, who is a poet from the Ukraine. And this is from his first collection, Dancing in Odessa. So he wrote, did I say that right? Odessa?
Mhm.
Yeah. So he wrote this in like 2004, this came out. So this is kind of an older collection, but it won the Dorset Prize at Chupleo Press.
I was thinking 2004 was tremendously modern.
Oh, well, no, I mean, no. So he's modern, but I'm saying he has a new collection
okay.
also. So, I mean, well, specifically in context, so, like, he wrote this a long time before the current war in the Ukraine,
okay.
is what I meant by that. And he's also, so he's a deaf poet, and his whole, which is amazing, and but his stuff is, like, amazing and musical and lyrical, and you wouldn't know that. And he doesn't really...
Do you know, was he deaf from birth, or?
I think he was deaf since age 4.
Oh, wow.
So, but his language is really musical and beautiful. And he doesn't, so in this collection, he's more talking about the city of Odessa. And it's called Dancing in Odessa. So obviously Odessa is, there's a lot of really hard things going on. But as we'll see in the poem, he's always looking at, he's finding so many beautiful encounters and beautiful things. So that's what it's really, this collection in particular is really, really about the city. And I think in his later collection he writes about like the experience of being deaf. It's called Deaf in Public.
So does he write in English, or this is a translation of his work from Ukrainian?
No, this is wild too. So he wrote in English, and English is his second language. Like, I think Ukrainian is his first language. And I read an interview with him, and they were like, why do you write in English? I mean, obviously, besides it being like a better marketing move, which isn't even something he mentioned, but what he said was, so I don't really know many people who speak English. Like, my family doesn't speak English, and that's why I wrote my poetry in English. And I mean, because he is writing about real people and real things that happen. And as a poet myself, like, I really, really related to that and understood that. I think a lot of times I'm kind of hesitant to write about people in real life that speak English in real events. And
so if you're
like
writing
that,
about something that people who you're writing about can't read, it's
you're liberated. Well, no, and that's why. So my husband, his first language is Chinese, and his English is good, but he doesn't read my poems or anything. And it was like, I write a lot of stuff now about him, and I feel liberated in writing those things because I know he's not
going to read it.
He's not going to read it, and not that it's bad things or anything. Like, I mean, a lot of the time it's like, I love him so much, he's so great. But there is, it's just a different. It's like a freedom and a liberation, so I totally related to that when he said that. But yeah, so he's really wonderful. And I highly recommend this collection, and I think they are doing an audiobook recording of it also, like, now, because of everything going on in the Ukraine. I think he's going to read it, and they're going to re-release it if you want to hear him read the whole thing. But I was so moved by the whole, particularly, like, the whole thing as a whole is just, like, really, really beautiful.
So how did you get introduced to this poet?
He was just at the library, and... So
he was physically at the library, or his work was at the library?
No, his work was at the library, and so I was taking out a bunch of collections from the library, and this was one that I just grabbed. Like, I didn't even realize that he was a big name poet, a big name contemporary poet. I had no idea. So I just grabbed it off the shelf because I thought, like, my family's from Ukraine. I was like, oh, like, Ukraine, that's great.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask about that. What is your family's relationship to Ukraine?
My great-grandpa came from the Ukraine, and he lived in Brazil and then came to America. So he spoke English, but it was like his third language. And then his wife, I think the rest of my family was maybe one more generation removed, but so he just came right there, and my grandma and all of her sisters and everybody spoke Ukrainian, though my grandma spoke a little bit less because she was the baby. There was a 20-year age gap. But they all went to the Ukrainian club and all that stuff, and they make the pierogies and the halupkis, and the Ukrainian church my grandma used to go to, which is a church again that has the smells and the bells and is really mystical and beautiful, and I love that. And she had this amazing story about how on Easter you'd go to the church on Easter and you'd go inside and everything would be totally barren. This is at 5 o'clock in the morning, so it's dark. Nothing is inside the church. It's super aesthetic, and then everybody has to go outside and walk around the church. I think it was 3 times, and you also had to fast for however long, so everybody was really hungry and cranky. But so you say all these prayers and you walk around the church really, really slowly, and then when you go back in at the end of the 3 times, there's flowers everywhere and all of these amazing things. And my grandma said it was the most beautiful thing as a kid. It was a magic trick, you couldn't even believe it. But I mean, and she was so moved by that. So just in keeping in line with art.
That,
But
I
yeah,
mean, that's still the
it's
tradition of the
really
Eastern Church.
beautiful. Yeah.
And when you walk around the church and you finally make it back to the door, what happens is the priest has a cross, and he takes the cross and he knocks on the door 3 times
Yeah.
with the cross, and then they fling open the doors,
Yeah.
and that's when you look inside, and it's light and beautiful.
Amazing. You've been to this?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize.
And then you
that.
sing Christos Voskreset.
Yeah, she says that. Okay.
Christos Voskreset is mir fix, mir fis, mir poprav.
Yeah.
You sing that song and you go over it. You sing that song about 50 times in the next 2 hours, but it's very, very exciting, very beautiful, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. The Eastern Christians do Easter, I think, better than anybody else. It's really spectacular, and
Yeah.
it's also because they have been fasting. Their fasts are stricter than the
Yeah.
Roman fasts, and so you fast a long time, and you have a lot of long liturgies. Good Friday is a long liturgy. You know, a lot of these liturgies where you're tired, you're cranky, and then just to have it explode like that, it's really a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And by that point, you're so hungry, you're hallucinating. So.
Well, I've always said that if I were to write my spiritual autobiography, it would be called "Fasting Makes Me Hungry," because I really hate to fast.
Do you fast? Do you abide by the Eastern fast?
I try to.
Yeah.
It's difficult, and I used to go over and above that, but I got allergic to too many foods that there was nothing left to eat.
No, they're intense. I'm not good with the fasting. It's not my spiritual.
I mean, it can be
choice.
difficult, but you know, if you read Chrysostom's Easter homily, he talks about this. Like, okay, say you didn't start at the beginning, that's okay. You're here now. Like, it's if you came at the 9th hour, the 10th hour, the 11th, it doesn't matter, right? So don't think, oh, I didn't do the whole way, or I fell, I anything like that. Once you reach that door, no matter how long it took you to get there, like if you didn't do the whole fast, you didn't do anything, but now we're all on equal footing.
Yeah.
As soon as they say, Christ is risen, which is Christos Voskreset, that's it, right? We're all in it together.
Yeah.
So you don't look around and say, well, I fasted for 50 days and you only did 12, and or I gave up this and you didn't give up that, or you fell during the fast and ate a chocolate pie with whipped cream, right? It's and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
By now you put all that behind you.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point, that now we're all here together.
Yes.
So you could forget your sins and
Oh,
move on.
I like that. That's like the story where they're working all day and they get really mad because the guy comes in at the end in the Bible. Do you know what I'm talking about? They're all slaving out in the sun, and then the one guy comes in and he works at the very end, and they all get paid $50, and the guys that were there all day are like, "Are you kidding me?" And then the boss is supposed to be a metaphor for God, and he's like, "No, I'm not kidding you. You can always come to me and I'll still be there for you," which is encouraging because I can't even fast for blood work, so I'm not kidding, it's really bad.
Yeah, anytime I have to do my blood work for the yearly physical, like a cholesterol test or something, and they say fast for whatever it is, 12 hours, I was like, oh my, 12 hours.
I know, I'm like,
that's just insane.
Yeah, and they're like, you just go to bed.
Yeah.
You don't, because I eat so late at night, it wouldn't be 12 hours, and also it gives me anxiety, and food comforts my anxiety. So oh my god, I schedule it so many times, and then I have to call them and be like, I just ate breakfast because I was so anxious, I can't go in. So,
All right, so now we're ready for
the
Ilya's poem.
Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna read the very first poem in the collection. Yeah, because I think it's really good. I mean, they're all really good, but we're gonna start with this one. So it's called Author's Prayer. If I speak for the dead, I must leave this animal of my body. I must write the same poem over and over, for an empty page is the white flag of their surrender. If I speak for them, I must walk on the edge of myself. I must live as a blind man who runs through rooms without touching the furniture. Yes, I live. I can cross the streets asking, what year is it? I can dance in my sleep and laugh in front of the mirror. Even sleep is a prayer, Lord. I will praise your madness, and in a language not mine, speak of music that wakes us, music in which we move. For whatever I say is a kind of petition, and the darkest days must I praise.
That's very nice.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful?
So tell us, what hits you about this poem?
Well, I everything about it, really. I think so. I mean, I think it's a perfect opening for the collection, but I also think that after having read the whole collection and coming back to it, it just kind of like floors you because it is almost the whole collection encapsulated in one poem.
Well, it almost seems like a statement of purpose for the writing the poem.
Right, yeah, for everything. And to see how beautifully that, unfolds. And I think also it kind of reminded me too, we were talking about the Greeks before, but it reminds me almost like of the invocation to the muse that the Greeks would do at the beginning of their work. But this is obviously like explicitly to God, and it's a prayer. So it's not calling on the muse, it's calling to God, but it's almost like, God, like, guide me as I'm writing these poems. I mean, it's beautiful in itself, and it's also like asking for God to be there and infuse every word of this poem and every word of the collection and everything. I mean, transcendent of that, like also his life, but just like an invitation, I think, for God to be there, but also like praising God at the same time, and I think that's really beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I like also a lot, particularly, is the ending line. So for whatever I say is a kind of petition, and the darkest days must I praise. And so I mean, he's dealing with a lot of like horrible things are happening in Odessa. And there's like wars and starvation and all this stuff, but he's always like every single poem is turning towards I think beauty and kind of seeking beauty and seeking God and looking for God in the incarnation of everything, and I think that's why it's called Dancing in Odessa. And
well, I think that goes back to what we were talking about before, the Mass on the Rock in a war-torn area.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You're in a horrible situation. That doesn't mean you stop looking for beauty.
Right.
You don't give up. You don't give in to despair and say, well, it's terrible, so I just give up. Right? You still look for the beauty. It could be, like you said, that mass could be so incredibly beautiful, just on a rock with everyone in torn clothes and just ravenously hungry, and it's still because that's deeply meaningful. So in the same way, you're in a city that's just suffering. You could still find that meaning. You can still find beauty in all of that.
Right. Right. And it's so easy, I think, in situations when you're feeling kind of despairing to collapse into like cynicism. And I think this is like an act of resistance against that, which is really powerful. Yeah. And beautiful.
I think that's the tremendously important for our time to fight against the cynicism.
Yeah.
I think we as a society now are not doing that very well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're looking for a reason to be cynical.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and instead of looking for beauty, hiding from it.
Yeah.
Right. Because you want everything on your own terms, maybe, or only in line with what you're thinking that day, and you don't want to look outside of yourself. And that's what he's saying. He's looking outside of himself.
Oh, yeah, I really like that. No, and I think that is so important, the looking outside of yourself, like the getting outside of your own head. I think that, like, the outward facing is an antidote for a lot of things, and a lot of bad feelings and a lot of despair. And, like, even the whole, like, the postmodern syndrome of, like if you read people like David Foster Wallace, or, like, anybody kind of in that tradition where they're dealing with, like, postmodern philosophy and the self, and they're getting stuck in these, like, labyrinths of, like, despair. Well, you can't get out of it. Like, if you're writing in that way, you can't think your way out of like your own ego, and it's all. I mean, it is just so ego driven, and that's why I think a lot of it ends up being despairing. And
they're looking for a way to find despair.
Right. Well,
right?
No, I mean, I think
when
you're trapped in that, like, you can't get out, but there is an easy way to not be in that, and it's to just not. Like, your ego is never going to get you out of your ego. You have to look at something else. Like, you have to get outside of your head. Does that make sense? So, yeah.
I think the poem that I'm going to read later, I think that's the point. If you really want to find out what's in yourself, the best way is to look up, right? To look outside of yourself, to look, to try to see what's out there, to look for the transcendent. Right. And when you find that, then you find that that's in yourself. It's not, right? If you because you're part of the rest of creation. You're not just, a dismal creature on your own, right? So, in terms of looking in for the inside, that doesn't mean you don't look outside, right? That you look for the transcendent outside, and that's going to help you understand your inner side better than just, shutting out the outside world. Shutting out the transcendent never really helps.
Yes. No, I completely agree with that. And not even just the transcendent, but shutting out like other people and shutting out anything. anything outside of you,
Mm.
if that makes sense. There's this thing, have you ever read Middlemarch?
I haven't now.
This is like something I think about probably every day, but there's a character in Middlemarch whose head is just so far up his own butt that he is like, basically he's just like a pure solipsist. Like, he can't think of anybody besides himself, and so he borrows money from this family that's poor, and he has this whole like scheme. Like, I don't know what he's trying to do. He's trying to like sell a horse, like flip a horse for profit, but it falls through because he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he's like just like ignorant. He has no idea what he's doing, and so he wanted to marry the daughter of the guy who he borrowed money from, but he lost this poor family's like whole savings. So he goes back, and the only thing he really is like upset about is he's like, oh my god, they're gonna be so mad at me. Like, the whole situation to him is just about how they're gonna be mad at him. They're not gonna let him marry the daughter, and like he feels bad, not because of what it means for them, but because of how they're gonna think of him. Whereas like, so as soon as he tells the daughter like what happened, her first thought is like, oh my god, like is the meaning of what that means, the meaning of what the money means. So it's like, okay, well, now her brother's not going to be able to go to this like college thing. He's not going to be able to, like, her mom's going to have to pick up all these extra lessons, like all of these things, because his action has meaning that affects all these other people. And so it has really nothing to do with his reputation and like how all of these people's lives are like genuinely being affected. And so I guess the point of that is that the daughter is able to look outside of she's able to look at all these people and see what a situation means, whereas he's only able to see what it means to himself. Does that make sense? So I just feel like and he's just like sad and mopey and like weepy, and it's because he has no connection or sense of anybody else in the world, or like how his actions could affect anybody else in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's isolating. It's isolating to yourself. You're only concerned with yourself.
Right.
You're cut off from the things that nurture most human beings.
Right.
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 What do you think about the structure of this poem? Could you say something about the music of it, the rhythm,
Oh yeah.
It's split up into
Couplets.
Yeah, couplets. I don't know how many, 10 or something like that. Nine.
Oh.
I'm sorry, 9. I was off by 1.
Yeah.
So that it's almost like it's a point, then a point, and then a point. Not a very long one, but like more like arrows than. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, not these like Wait, no. What do you mean?
Not like a whole big diatribe, but very short points.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I particularly like that style.
Yeah, I like that style
Right.
too. Yeah. Well, and I think in breaking it up like that, so I mean, whenever you have lines that are enjammed, I mean, each individual line has a meaning. Like, when you look at each individual line separately, and then so I think that meaning is just like abundant and teeming in ways that it wouldn't like be if you just had all the lines in prose. So even like if you look at, so the very first individual line of the poem is, if I speak for the dead, I must leave. So like that has a different meaning than the whole sentence, which is, if I speak for the dead, I must leave this animal of my body. Does that, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think the way he does the enjambment is really, really beautiful. And that's something, I mean, it's hard to, unless you're like physically looking at the poem,
Yeah.
you have to see it. But I do think that having so many smaller meanings inside of his like big sentences makes it really like extra beautiful and special.
So what do you think he means there, if I speak for the dead?
Well, I think he's I think he's talking about the dead people in Odessa specifically.
To the people who have died in a tragic sense, right?
Yeah, or the people who have died maybe even just related to his home, but it could also be like the dead of the whole world. And I mean,
So what is he saying on behalf of the dead, do you think? What do you think he's trying to convey?
Well, I think he's saying, first of all, if I speak for the dead. So he's not necessarily saying
He's not claiming to speak for the dead.
Speaking for the dead. He's saying if I do, I have to get out of my body.
Out of the physicality of the...
Yeah. So it's specifically the animal of my body, so that would be like kind of like a base the body and the base sense
he has
of
to get to the spiritual nature of his being rather than the physical, the animal part of his being.
Right, which is also, and well, yeah, okay. and then he also says, so, and I must write the same poem over and over, for an empty page is the white flag of their surrender. So the act of writing itself, if he is going to speak for the dead, then he has to keep writing the poems over and over again and not allowing them to surrender. And I mean, he did write a whole collection. So maybe he is saying, like, yeah, I am doing that.
But it seems like if you're not writing, if he's not doing something, then he's letting it fall into despair.
Right.
That's the way I see it.
Right.
You're surrendering into despair if you just do nothing. Right? So you've seen these awful things. And if you do absolutely nothing, right, then you're surrendering to this. You're just surrendering to the despair. You're not giving any meaning to what's going on. You're not trying to pull out of the despair. Right. You're just giving up and going up to it.
Right. And I mean, that actually, it ties back to what we were talking about too before, with just art as being fundamentally like able to connect you to something bigger, or as art having a purpose, and so I think he's saying that the poems and the art and the things he's creating are like the antidote to that despair.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I just really like the image to the idea of the blank page being a flag of surrender, because that's literally what it is a white flag. But then you're looking at this physical white page, but it does have the words on it, so it's not a flag of surrender. Like the existence of the poem itself is saying, like, we're not surrendering.
Yeah.
For
me, and I'm assuming for you, because we've both written a lot, the blank page is a tyrannical notion to me. Like, nothing scares me more than just seeing the blank page, right? It makes me think, okay, I'm out of ideas, right? I don't know what to do, right? Just seeing that, struggling to get that first line down.
I love the blank page. Because it means I might be the only person that said that, but no, I love it because it's like, it means you're starting over and you're not tyrannized by what you already made.
Oh, wow.
Anything.
It doesn't frighten you to look at the blank page?
No, it's full of possibility.
Oh, wow. You're so positive.
No, I like the nothingness. So we've talked about this before. Yeah. I like the chaos and the void and stuff like that. Sometimes it's worse when I've written something and it's like bad, and then I have to go back and reread it and deal with it, because it's like, well, this is something and it's bad. So, but with the blank page, it's not bad yet. It has the potential, to come out good,
I rarely do any good work just sitting there looking at a blank page. I walk around, I'm thinking, I'm going for a bike ride or shopping for groceries or baking a cake, who knows, anything. Playing catch, something, and that's when my good ideas happen, and then I just run and fill up the page.
Oh, interesting.
Right, because so that the just sitting there in front of the blank page doesn't do it for me.
Oh,
I have to be out and thinking, and
Yeah.
So the best mathematical ideas I get are when I'm riding home on my bicycle along the trail. Then I get all of my good ideas.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, some people are like that.
So obviously not you.
Distracted by trying to exist in the world. No, sometimes I have ideas when I'm like, when I'm doing other stuff, or like, yeah, that is true. And typically those are good because they feel like they're coming from outside of yourself. But I think also,
you're not putting pressure on yourself to think at that time.
Right. No, that is true. I like thinking, like, something about not having to do anything is sometimes like liberating to me, though. Oh. I know. I don't know. It's like, it's kind of weird. But wait, what the thing that you said about the poems, like, you'll be outside doing, there's a poem about that. So a poet who that happens to, and it's about her, like, a poem coming to her when she's like in a field and she's trying to like catch it, but she gets the tail of it, and like, so she ends up writing it backwards or something. Like, I can't remember it, but it was very funny. But yeah, so it made me think of that. But I know a lot of people say stuff like Don Draper said that in Mad Men. He'd think all day and then he'd go to the movie and then he'd get the brilliant stroke of insight that would, make him lots of money and manipulate people.
I don't think Don Draper is a good model for the Christian intellectual tradition.
I know, I'm just saying. It's like that's
No,
the
but certainly it
insidious
was, yeah.
mental
I mean, I think
experience.
many creative people think this, that you have to be a certain level of distraction before you get to the right idea.
Yeah.
But some people don't. They can't function with the distraction.
Yeah.
I think it depends very much on the way you look at things.
Yeah.
But when I read that line about the blank page, that's the first thing that came to me.
You're
You know that
stressed.
phrase, the tyranny of the blank page.
Yeah, well, now I do.
I didn't come up with that.
Yeah.
That's some author said that.
No,
once.
I know. Yeah, I know.
And I don't
people
remember
that
who said it.
freaked out by it. It depends. I think it depends. I like the possibility.
All right, so where does the poet go after the
So,
blank
yeah,
page?
after the blank page. So now here's another conditional. So if I speak for them like a second time, I must walk on the edge of myself. I must live as a blind man who runs through rooms without touching the furniture. So what do you think about that?
I don't know. That's a nice dodge to get.
I know. I knew that you were gonna say that first. So.
I love that image of the blind man walking through without touching the furniture.
Yes.
Right. So you're ascribing to this blind man a certain amount of skill. He knows the room, right?
Right.
He knows how to move through this room and not touch the furniture.
Right.
Right. He knows how to do it even though he can't see it. Right. So that's the way I think that the metaphor there is that's the way he's going through this experience. Right.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand it completely, but he's still, he can't touch the furniture.
Right.
You still have to manage through your way, even though you're not seeing things. You don't understand the what's happening.
Yeah. Oh, I really like that explanation, and I like the thing you were talking about, how like it is just the skill of it, how it would take it, like it wouldn't just be a normal experience. It would be something, that would be kind of learned, right?
Yeah.
I think I didn't even think about that, but yeah. I think it's just such a good image, but I think that is good. I want to point out too the way the line breaks on the lines, because so it goes, who runs through the room without line break touching the furniture. So in the way he breaks that up too, I mean, touching the furniture is its own thing, but I mean, since without comes before, so literally the sentence is saying without touching the furniture, but then one line on its own is touching the furniture, so
Yeah.
like, which is a totally different image. I mean, it's the
And
thing.
a couplet's not a complete thought.
Right. Well, but
the two
it's
couplets make the complete.
he's
Yeah.
giving you the thing and the negation of the thing. So he's giving you like touching the furniture as a unit, and he's giving you without touching the furniture as a unit.
Yeah.
Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think like the paradox of like, it's a paradox, and it's you're doing and not doing at the same time.
Yeah. It seems to me as a a deaf poet, that he must feel that himself. I mean,
Yeah.
to not hear the poem read aloud, to not
Right.
hear the musicality of it, must be difficult.
Right. Right. But I mean, and I think his poems are so musical and lyrical.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that that's something really striking about it. And I thought of that as well. But and I also think, so he is deaf, and I think it is interesting though that he chose the image of a blind man instead of a deaf man for that.
Yeah.
Also.
I don't know what the allegory though. A deaf man not doing what? I mean,
Well, you can, and again,
I like the imagery better of not touching the
not
furniture.
touching the furniture, yeah, that is true. And he does talk later about language and stuff. He does turn to language, but it's definitely an easier image to see because it is an image. Yeah.
Okay, where does he go from there?
Okay, so from there, so yes, I live. I can cross the streets asking, what year is it? I can dance in my sleep and laugh in front of the mirror. Should I do more?
Uh-huh.
Oh, even sleep is a prayer, Lord. I will praise your madness, and in a language not mine, speak of music that wakes us, music in which we move. And then there's the last.
What do you think about that part?
Well, I think, you said that really fast.
What do you think about the line, even sleep is a prayer? I like that one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I like that line too. Well, you're always connected to God. You don't have to be doing something. You could just be. It's almost like the Asian thing with Wu Wei, like the non-action as a form of action,
Yeah.
right? And so allowing sleep to be I mean, I feel like we always think of prayer as like this active thing, but I think he's saying like even just existing can be existing and dreaming and sleeping and not doing anything can be a prayer, and I think that's really
Well, there's this tradition in Eastern Christianity called Hesychism, and within Hesychism, you would turn your breathing into a prayer. So you would think about the breathing, right? So you say the Jesus prayer. So you say Господи Иисусе Христе, Syn Bože, and breathing in, and pomilo mia reshnaho at the breathing out. So it like matches up in the Slavonic how many syllables going in and how many syllables going out.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So in English, that's Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Do you say it out loud? Or in
You
your
say
head?
it interiorly, not in your head,
Yeah,
not
I was
out
gonna
loud.
say it's kind of hard to breathe and do that, but okay.
But you're supposed to match
Yeah.
it with your, so you're breathing, so that the idea is your whole body becomes the prayer.
Yeah.
Every part of you becomes a prayer.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's very
Right.
meditative too,
Yeah.
and very like Eastern.
Yeah.
Also. Well, I mean, yeah, Eastern Christianity.
But you're
like,
saying Eastern, like
even
Eastern Asian.
Easter, Easter than Eastern Christianity, maybe. But no, yeah, like with
You're talking more like
meditation.
Buddhism and Zen Buddhism in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yoga,
there's certainly a
things like that.
similarity there.
Yeah.
So there would be the way they would do this. They would do things like say this prayer 1,000 times in a day or something.
Who is doing these things?
Monks and
Oh,
things
okay.
like. But no, like, the book. There's a book called The Way of the Pilgrim. So this guy would
I've read
be.
that. Oh my god.
So he would be walking, right?
Yeah.
You read that, so you know what I'm talking
Your
about.
good friend recommended that. to me.
So you're walking along.
Yeah.
And so he's walking, 10 miles a day or something like that.
Yeah.
And as he's walking, he's saying this prayer
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
measuring it
yeah.
out with the beats.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I yeah.
Chotki. It's like so like an Eastern rosary.
Yeah.
And so you say that, but you match it along with your breathing and your footsteps and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So in that sense, he's talking. So I'm sure the author knows about this.
Yeah.
Right? So he's saying that the sleep is a prayer.
Right.
Right, so the breathing and the sleep, everything is the sleep. If you've oriented what
Yes.
you're doing towards God,
Even
then
sleep.
even sleep is a prayer.
Yeah, wait, I like that so much. Yeah, and the whole body, just everything. Right, yeah, and when you're sleeping, you're not talking, and it's a subconscious state. And right, so exactly like you were saying, if you're oriented towards Jesus, you don't have to be consciously doing it. Your whole subconscious and your whole like very being and your whole incarnate body and existence and all of that is doing the prayer. Oh my God, I like that so much. It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
Incarnation. My favorite thing.
All right. So how does he finish the poem?
Oh wait, I wanted to hold on. We missed something important. We missed two important things, but something I just realized too. So because before he says that even sleep is a prayer, he says I can dance in my sleep, which is interesting. But obviously dancing is really important to this collection because it's called Dancing in Odessa, and there's a lot of like dancing poems. But I think the idea also just I like dancing as a form of movement and a form of beauty and a form of art that's not words or logos, but so embodied and so like basically everything you were talking about. And so dancing as this like embodied thing and connecting that to sleep in that way, just as like the body itself all being a prayer, all like working together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know. Have you seen the movie Jojo Rabbit?
Is that the one with Hitler?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, I actually didn't see it. But it's because Taiko, so I love him, but I didn't see it, so don't ruin it for me, because I'm really excited to
Well,
see
I can just tell you one line.
Okay.
It's too bad you haven't seen it because it's very good.
Yeah.
But the mother in the movie says we dance to show God that we're grateful.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
And so there's a nice scene where they're dancing in the movie, and as you can imagine, it's set in World War II.
Yeah.
Things are pretty bad.
Yeah.
But so even in the midst of this just horror,
Right.
they're still trying to find joy, right? Even though the horror hits, so close to them. It's hitting everywhere. World War II didn't leave anybody in Europe unscathed,
Well,
right? It's not like, we were okay here. Nobody was okay anywhere.
Yeah.
And so, but in the movie, that's what the mother says to the child. It's really beautiful.
That is really beautiful.
And that's what I thought of when he was saying that, because, if you're dancing in the streets of Odessa, so things aren't going so great, but, you still, that doesn't mean you don't dance, right?
And I think dancing is just something so fundamentally, like, joyful. Like, nobody dances, like, you can't be sad and dance. Well, I mean, I guess you can be, but...
When I dance, everyone around me is sad.
Yeah, but you're happy. You're having a good time, and that's all that matters.
I don't know.
But I think it is, like, celebratory, and I think there is just something, like, joyful and beautiful. I mean, I think it invokes embodied beauty. Like, when people use that word metaphorically, like, oh, like, the grass was dancing or the river was dancing, like, you're not thinking, like, oh my God, the grass was so ugly. I think it has connotations of beauty and joy. So I think that is really, and in being in motion and sleep being that way too.
I was at a wedding once in Brooklyn, in New York, and the wedding was for Russian Jewish immigrants, and everyone in the whole place except for me and Kelly, and two other people were Russian Jewish immigrants.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate part about it was this was October 2001, so right after 9/11.
2001.
2001.
Oh wait,
like 2000
I was
September
thinking
11th.
2021.
No,
You
2001. This is a long
heard it
time
wrong.
ago.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, and we were in
Oh.
Brooklyn, and I mean, you could still see the horror. Just look over the river and see the horror that happened in Manhattan. So it was really just still unbelievably traumatic.
Yeah.
And in fact, Kelly and I decided we were going to go because we just thought we can't just not go, because what are we going to do? Let them govern our lives? Let evil govern our lives? And because it was frightening just to go into New York.
Yeah.
Because then you start getting like anthrax attacks and all this other kind of stuff. We
yeah.
were thinking, can we go? And we just said we're going to go, because what are we going to do? Just cower in our basement.
Yeah.
And so they get there, and the rabbi was an American, I think. Well, he spoke English. He didn't speak Russian. And he came up and he said to the people, he said, we all know what's going on in the world. We know that this is a bad time.
Yeah.
He said, but today is a wedding. And he said, we're Jews, and most of these people were from places like Odessa. Some of them probably were from Odessa. And he said, we've been through turmoil before.
Yeah.
So there were people in the room who were survivors of the Holocaust, Maybe they weren't in camps, but they had escaped the Nazis, right? These were people who had been face to face with Nazis, everything else. People who had been, tormented and things like this. And he said, we've been through this before. He said, but that doesn't mean you don't take a day out and you just dance for joy that these people are getting married. It was really a beautiful sermon. That he said, he said something like, tomorrow we could go back to being frightened. For today, we dance for joy, because, we've been, and he was right. Those people had been through this before, and they knew it. So even if you're, you can't say, okay, we're not going to be happy because everything's not perfect. You still have to dance for joy, even in the midst of the rubble.
Yeah.
Right. So I thought it was a really moving speech that he gave.
Yeah. I moved. That's why I'm feeling emotional based on what you're saying. I was like, oh my God, yeah. I was very moved by that.
So that's dancing in the streets of Odessa.
Fundamentally moving. Yeah. No. Exactly.
All right.
Very beautiful. I'm gonna cry. And the podcast.
Do you need a tissue?
No, I'm fine. Yeah, I know where they are now. There's a big bin of them behind me. But, yeah. No. Okay.
So how does he finish the poem?
Wait, I had one more thing.
Oh, you have
to
one more
say
thing.
about that. Yeah, no, when he's saying, well, I mean, I guess, yeah. So I will praise your madness, and in a language not mine, because he's writing in English, not in Ukrainian. But also, I mean, in terms of, like, being deaf, like a double language, not his, but speak of music that wakes us. And so music in which we move, which is, again, I mean, just connecting it back to dancing, but then also him being, like, the source. Also, like, the art being a source of music, and, like, music being the thing that's behind the dancing. I just kind of realized that now, but, like, that's really beautiful. So it's, like, even in this creation, like, the creation of the art itself and, like, the existence of the art itself, not that it's, like, a prerequisite for all dancing, but that it's cyclically, like, he's talking about dancing, like, things that he's moved by, but then in talking about that, he's creating music, which, like, in turn gives way to more dancing, like begets more dancing, and that's really beautiful. So it's just this like circle of beautiful things happening, and him being the music.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
That's really beautiful. Okay.
So the last question then is, how do you fit this into the Catholic intellectual tradition? What do you see as really touching you on a Catholic notion here?
From that specifically? Or
from the poem in general, just.
Oh,
That is how you pick the poem, right?
No, yeah, that is why I just had like a, well, what do you think? I'm still traumatized from the
wedding.
From the wedding speech. I'm like.
I mean, I think fundamentally what this poem is saying, even when times are bad, that does not mean you don't reach for the transcendent. You reach for it even more.
Right.
Right? I mean, you don't fall into despair, as you said. I think that's a fundamentally Catholic notion that, we're at a Jesuit school, and one of the things that's written on a lot of our walls is in omnibus quaerent deum, right? In all things, let them seek God, right? You're supposed to be looking for God all the time, not just when, everything is great and, when you look in the mirror and you're happy with what you see, right? You should be looking for God when you look in the mirror and you hate what you see, and, when things are not going well and there's turmoil, and that doesn't mean that you stop looking for the transcendent, because the transcendent is still there.
Right.
There's still a reason to dance. There's still a reason to be joyful, right? You can't. I think I think that's a fundamental principle in Catholicism, that you're always striving for God. Yes. Like you don't let the bad things that happen in life, because bad things happen to everybody. Right. You don't let that derail you from your path to God. Right. Yes. Right? Which I think a lot of times it does to people.
Yeah.
Right?
No, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You say to people, well, how did you lose their faith? And they tell you like one bad thing that happened. And like, well,
yeah.
I'm sorry that happened to you, but that same kind of thing happened to a million people, right? I mean, you can't let that derail you from what you truly believe, what you're truly looking for, right? A transcendent experience, right? I think that's so I think you picked a poem that was absolutely perfect for what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and that is the last line, is exactly right. That for whatever I say is a kind of petition, and the darkest days must I praise. That's exactly what you just said. Yeah. And that is why I picked it. I picked it based on the last line, and because prayer was in the title, I was like, oh, it's got to be Catholic. No, but yeah, I think that, and I think also I just think too, everything you were talking about too. I think it's important that he is the one doing it, because I think sometimes like when you're sad and something happens to you, there's nothing worse than like if you go to like your friend or something and you're like, this really bad thing happened, and they're like, oh well, just like everything happens for a reason, or like just look to, it's like, no, like I'm telling you I'm sad, like comfort me, like in this, like, but I think that
you don't want a platitude, you don't want to
you don't, like I don't even want my friend to tell me what to do, but like
you just want to talk about
you want to talk about it, but I think
you want to be heard
when that's happening. But I think that like I think that is something that when you take it up for yourself and you do find that for yourself, and you are creating the music for yourself, and you are like the author in this. So like when you're entering into it and doing it the work for yourself, not telling other people like you have to be happy or whatever, like doing it yourself for yourself. Does that make sense? And I mean, even like there was an artistic choice why he wrote the poem in first person, and not like you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do this. He's like, no, like this is what I'm doing. I'm taking this up, and I think that's way more powerful and way more moving.
But I think the last line connects to the first, in that he's making it a petition. In a petition, you're praying for someone else, right? Yeah. So he's speaking for the dead. He's praying for the people who've already lost.
Oh, right? Yeah, but he's not telling anybody what to do. He's doing it, and like.
But his petition is for people who are suffering.
Who are suffering,
right? Or are dead, or the dead, the suffering. So he's not just really mean the dead. He's mean the suffering, the people who are having a hard time, right? So he's saying, if I speak for them.
Right.
So he's making a petition. His action is a petition.
Exactly. And when you read the poem, or when anybody reads the poem, they are the I. I mean, right? Because like the I is the indexical. So I mean, and then so you are allowing that petition to enter in to you and to do that work from that first person, like embodied, like to petition to the other people, but like having it enter within yourself. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Right? Yeah. So I'm glad.
I-
I'm so glad we talked about this.
Could you read the poem one time through?
Yeah. The whole poem again?
Yeah.
Okay. So, author's prayer. If I speak for the dead, I must leave this animal of my body. I must write the same poem over and over, for an empty page is the white flag of their surrender. If I speak for them, I must walk on the edge of myself. I must live as a blind man who runs through rooms without touching the furniture. Yes, I live. I can cross the streets asking what year is it. I can dance in my sleep and laugh in front of the mirror. Even sleep is a prayer, Lord. I will praise your madness, and in a language not mine, speak of music that wakes us, music in which we move. For whatever I say is a kind of petition, and the darkest days must I praise. Yeah. It's so, I really like reading poems too after you talk about them, because then every line you just talked about and kind of
it hits more home.
It hits more.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
Oh, excellent.
yeah, so I like same thing as last time. I just feel like I got a lot out of talking about it with you and insights I wouldn't have necessarily had. Yeah, which is really cool.
What's interesting is that I told you could do more than one poem, and you said that's impossible because we've already spoken for an hour and 15 minutes, I think.
That's what I said, right? Yeah, I mean, we can do more than one poem. It'll be
We're gonna
here for 5 hours.
We're gonna do my poem is short, and we won't spend as long on it.
Okay.
Here's my poem.
No, who said you weren't gonna do this?
This is by an obscure 21st century poetess, if I may. This poem is called Jacob's Ladder. So in Jacob's Ladder is the idea there is that, not from the poem, but from biblical sources, Jacob seeing the ladder that's going to heaven. So this is the ladder you have to climb to get to heaven, how you as a human being are ascending into heaven.
Yes.
Okay, I'll read the poem, unless you'd rather read the poem.
No, you can read the poem.
Jacob's Ladder. When you can look up into the clouds and see through the clouds, see nothing, but know what lives up there already dwells in the silence of your heart. Then the ladder will appear, praise every blister, every rung, every breath, every inch of the joyful climb. The climb is the work. The work is love made visible. Love is the link between you and all you could be. All you want and all you could ever have.
Nice poem.
And the next page is that the ladder will bring you to where you want to go, to where you already are in your heart.
Oh, I forgot about that. Very nice.
So
Why did you pick this poem, Stephen?
Because I thought this is so this I think is fundamentally a Catholic poem. Because here's what you're saying. When you can look up into the clouds and through the clouds see nothing, but know what lives up there already dwells in the silence of your heart. So you're seeking, this is Trinitarian even, you're seeking God, in heaven. You're looking loftily up to heaven to find this inspiration. When you find this inspiration, you realized it was the Holy Spirit already in your heart, right? That God dwells within you, just like God dwells in heaven. Right? So to find God in yourself, so you look for the transcendent and you look outside yourself, but that's the only way you're really going to find out what's really inside yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Which is what I said before about, looking the way you find that. I think that's just an absolutely wonderful idea. And the line here, then the ladder will appear. Right? So it's kind of the realization that when can you actually get to heaven? Right? When can you ascend? Right? It's not by something that you're doing, that you know the magic word or something. It's when you know what you're actually looking for. Right?
Right. And I think, the idea of too, like, you're not, it's not a pull down ladder. Like, it's not a ladder to the attic that you can just say, like, okay, here.
You pull down when you want it. Yeah.
Pull down, yeah. I think it appears from somewhere outside of you, but it's also inside of you.
Yeah.
That's the point.
That's the point. And I love this phrase: praise every blister, every rung, every breath, every inch of the joyful climb. Because here's the, if you think of like the ladder of St. John Climacus, when you have the ladder and he's walking up the ladder and the devils are shooting arrows at you, like trying to knock you off, right? So,
It's not funny. I don't know. I'm laughing.
well, but it is you're trying to make it up and people are dragging you down. So what is dragging you down? Anxiety is dragging you down. Hatred, prejudice, anything that you have that's pulling you off of this thing,
Right.
right? And these things are working to pull you off, but the blister is you holding on,
Yeah.
right? All of these things that you're praising here. I love the line. Praise every blister, every rung, every breath. You're working hard to make it up the ladder, right? When you get to, if you're just climbing a regular ladder, you get to the top and you're out of breath because it's been so much work to get to the top of this really high ladder,
Yeah.
right? And you might be nervous because you're afraid of heights anyway. So you're
Yeah.
like you're breathing heavy. It's you shouldn't be saying, oh, I got a blister. Oh, I'm breathing heavy. Oh, I'm doing this. Praise that. That's living.
Right.
That's life right there.
Yeah.
Right, you're moving up the ladder. That's what you should be excited about.
Right.
Right. Like I heard some woman say, she didn't want to get plastic surgery. She every wrinkle on her face represented a smile that she had. Picking up a child,
yeah,
all
that
this
is
kind of
true.
stuff.
That is true.
Right. She didn't want to like deny herself that. Right.
Yeah.
And I think there always pressure like to erase that, but you should pray, like you say, like the author says, praise every blister,
Yeah.
right, every breath, every inch of the climb,
Right.
and then the author makes the point: the climb is the work, right,
Well, yeah.
right, and the work is love made visible. The love is the link between you and all you could be, right. So it's not just who you are now, but who you desire to be, right?
Yeah.
Maybe like in a glorified state in heaven, you're thinking, right? Me without the prejudice, me without the hate, without the anxiety, without the everything else, whatever that drags you down in your day.
Oh, interesting. I guess I was kind of thinking of that more as like God, like all you could like in. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. So shedding like all of those things that would maybe drag you down, but then also turning like even if you don't have any of those things, it doesn't necessarily mean you're connecting to like the universe or God or like a spirit outside of yourself. And so I think like transcending just your not necessarily even transcending, but just making yourself the better version of yourself and the better, more spiritual, more full of love and life and light and happiness version and joyful, embodied.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I
does that
think
make sense?
this goes back to the other poem. It's you're shedding the anxiety, the despair, and you're finding the joy, right?
Yes.
The joy is there at the top of this ladder, real, honest joy.
But it's also, I think, there in the work of climbing the ladder. You're not just trying to get to the destination, but it's like in the living, breathing experience. Like all of it is kind of the same thing. Like
it's the journey. The journey is the journey. The joy is in the journey itself, right? You're making up the ladder. This is just as important as being at the top is working your way to the top of the ladder.
Yeah, like there are like I feel like the working is the top, but like I feel like being at the bottom and being at the top and being on the ladder are all like the same thing. Does that make sense? No, like not. I mean, because it's saying like in the bottom when you're at the bottom, you're still connected to the top, and then that's how you have this link to like what is more spiritual, but then also like doing the work of that.
Well, you realized it was in yourself all the time, as the line says.
Yeah.
What lives up there already dwells in the silence of your heart.
Right. So it's like it's all of the.
You love this notion of things in silence and the vacuum and the.
Oh yeah, silence. Yeah, people do like that.
And I like this line here. The ladder will bring you to where you want to go, to where you already are in your heart. I mean, that is the same kind of idea.
Yeah, it's like the poem, but like a shorter version of it, kind of almost. In a way.
Before that poem, in the page prior, it says, "You don't need to know how the ladder showed up to take it up and climb to what you want to be up there."
Yeah.
What do you think that means?
I'm not sure. What do you think? No, I think I mean you don't have to logically maybe have everything totally. Like you just have to trust. You don't have to be like, God, I want to be somewhere else, or like I want something else, or I want to be like you. You don't need to focus on like, I have no idea how I'm going to get there. I'm down here. I'm stressed out. Like, I don't know how that would even be possible. Like, that's not what you have to focus on. Because as long as you're focusing on that, you're, I feel like, probably creating a rift between you and God. Whereas when you let that go, you don't have to worry about finding it. Like, it's going to appear when you enter into the stillness of your heart. And you're like, oh, hey, God, you're already there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think the theme of this book, if I were to ascribe a theme to this book of poetry, is motherhood. And I think of a child with a mother. So the child, say a child is 2 days old or something.
Yeah.
It has no scientific understanding of what a mother is. It doesn't know how it was created. It doesn't know how this mother is related to them. It doesn't understand anything about biology.
Right.
But it knows its mother, and it knows it wants to cling to its mother.
Right.
It's almost like the only thing that this child wants is to be near its mother.
Right.
And to be separated from the mother is just turmoil. So that in that sense, that's what I'm thinking, that the you don't know how the latter appears. The child does not know how the mother appears.
Right.
Or how this person is related to them. They don't know anything about sperm and ovum and anything else, right? They just know that this is their universe, right?
Yeah.
So they don't have an understanding, but they know that they love this person, and they want to be with this person.
Right. That's so. I never thought of that, but that is so beautiful, and I think that is there, and I think that is true, and I think like any. I mean, right, a baby has no understanding of any concepts or categories or they wouldn't even say the word love. Babies don't have words, they don't have language, but still having a fundamental understanding of everything that you just said, and I think that can probably be a metaphor too, for your relationship with God. You don't even necessarily have to have, you don't need to know every word of the Summa Theologica, or and you don't even need to have any concept of God as a concept, but I think you can still feel that. And I also think the same goes the other way. I think there's people who study, you could study the Bible, you could study all of these things, but not have the experience of God. It's a totally different thing from the experience of God. It's it doesn't necessarily mean you're encountering it, and especially if people get stuck on different theological rules and stuff like that without actually experiencing God, the lived embodied experience of God, which is beyond categories and beyond language and beyond all of this stuff. You do encounter God, who is the Father, as a child and a baby who would. I just I love that you said that. I think that was really great.
Oh, thank you. But I think, like you're saying, you don't need, if somebody says to you, well, oh, okay, this God that you love, how can you explain to me how he did this creation, or how he interacts with the rest of the world, or why doesn't he do this, why doesn't he do that? You may not have any knowledge of that. That does not take away from the fact that you're clinging to this, right? That you want to be close. Right. The baby doesn't understand anything, and it's. Right. I always feel it's very silly us to think that we're ever going to come to any kind of complete knowledge, right? It's most people can't look at the iPad and understand how it's working, right? They have no idea how it's working.
I definitely can't.
If you can't figure out how the inside of the iPad is making these pictures appear and all this stuff happen, how could you possibly understand everything about the whole known universe?
Right, everything intellectual.
So everything. So you could explain, where life comes from, where why the Big Bang happened, all this kind of stuff. All these things, you don't need an explanation of that to want to cling to God, right? Because you're not going to understand the whole universe. Nobody understands the whole universe, right? You may understand your little part of it, right? You may know, I know a lot about mathematics. That doesn't mean I know anything about chemistry or biology, right? A biologist might know stuff about biology, but they don't understand anything about particle physics, right? The universe is big. Right. There's a lot of things to know.
Yeah. Too many.
And the other thing you said was that about you could read the Bible and study it all the time and still gain no wisdom from it if you have the wrong attitude. I think C.S. Lewis said it something like, the only people who read the classic texts anymore are the same people who have no chance of gaining any wisdom from them.
Yeah. Well, right. No, but no, sometimes
you know that, right? It's like they're just looking for something to say about it from their own point of view, rather than saying, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this text?
Right.
Right? So am I learning something from Plato, or I'm just reading this so I could refute him and say something about myself? You know, it's like
Yeah.
so the people are reading the Bible not because they think this is going to lead them to God, because they're getting ready to criticize every line, and you know what I mean, like the intellectual mentality where they're not gaining any wisdom from anything they read.
Yeah. Or I was thinking too about people who read it and then they're just like a jerk. Like they use it to just be mean to other people, and they
Yeah.
pick out like one line from like Leviticus and like decide to just be mean to everybody. And it's like, why are you doing this? Like that makes no sense. Like read the whole story, you
Yeah.
know? Or like I don't know. That just doesn't vibe with me. So,
Yeah, I understand.
yeah.
All right, I'm going to read the poem one last time.
Okay.
That's okay.
That's okay.
When you can look up into the clouds and through the clouds see nothing, but know what lives up there already dwells in the silence of your heart, then the ladder will appear. Praise every blister, every rung, every breath, every inch of the joyful climb. The climb is the work. The work is love made visible. The love is the link between you and all you could be, all you want and all you could ever have. And that's Jacob's
Amen.
Ladder by one of my favorite poets, Lizzy Polishan.
Yeah, thanks, dude.
It's a wonderful
Oh my God.
poem from the book A Little Book of Blooms,
Yeah.
and I highly recommend it. As she gave a high recommendation for her book of poems, I will give a high recommendation for my book of poems too, and tell you should purchase this and read it.
Thanks, Stephen. No, I just want to comment briefly that it was really interesting to look at something that I wrote from like the perspective of a reader. I mean, like you being a reader, but then also encountering it in the way that we were encountering like the other poems. I think I had in the way that like I feel like every time we talk about a poem, I have insights that I didn't necessarily have the first time. Like even though I wrote that poem, like I feel like I got insights from it in talking about it as a reader, which is really cool, and which is the power of art.
Yeah, that's incredible.
To be no, yeah, actually it is incredible.
Yeah.
Wait, I just want to say one more thing too. That reminded me of a fortune cookie that I read the other day, and it was like faith is the bird that sings, sings for the light even when it's still dark. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was so beautiful. I like put it in the back of my phone, but my old phone, so now it's in my room, so I don't have it to actually look at. But just the idea of like trusting, I think it's just such a beautiful metaphor for God, like trusting in even when you're in the darkness, like you're a bird and
You know the light is
you
still
know the
there.
light is there, and
Yeah.
you're singing for it.
That's back to dancing on the streets of Odessa.
Exactly,
right?
singing, music, dancing, joy, the lived embodied experience of
Yeah.
joy and beautiful things.
So we encourage all of our listeners to be joyful,
Yeah.
even in the darkness.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's so nice.
I thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Lizzy, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.